The receptionist's fingers froze mid-keystroke, her morning routine shattered by the small figure standing before the imposing marble counter. Not an adult with a briefcase, but a little girl in a school uniform, clutching a folder nearly half her size. A child had come for a job interview. Beth's coffee mug slipped from her hand, splattering dark liquid across her pristine desk calendar as nearby employees stopped in their tracks, conversations dying mid-sentence. The security guard by the elevator straightened, uncertainty etched across his weathered face as he watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. The child's blue-green eyes, too old for her 6 years, met Beth's with unwavering determination, her tiny shoulders squared beneath the weight of adult responsibility. Just yesterday, those same small hands had probably colored pictures or held a teddy bear. "Get Mr.
Reynolds," Beth whispered urgently into her headset, her heart racing with a mixture of confusion and unexpected tenderness. Who was this brave little soldier, and what desperate circumstances had sent her alone into the corporate battlefield? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Jessica Morgan's hands trembled as she clutched the hospital bedsheet, her fever-flushed face contrasting sharply with the sterile white pillowcase beneath her head. The phone call had ended minutes ago, but the woman's cold voice still echoed in her mind. "We do not reschedule interviews." 6 words that had effectively demolished the fragile scaffolding of hope she'd constructed over weeks of preparation. At 34, Jessica's body bore invisible scars from her 2 tours as a military nurse in Afghanistan. The physical exhaustion of working 3 jobs, waitressing at Denny's mornings, administrative work at a local clinic afternoons, and cleaning offices on weekends, had finally caught up with her. Pneumonia, the doctor had said. Her immune system, compromised by years of stress and inadequate self-care, had simply surrendered. Across the room, Emma sat perfectly still on a plastic chair, small legs swinging inches above the floor. At 6, she carried herself with the gravity of someone who had witnessed too much. Her honey-brown hair was neatly combed, held back with a small silver clip, her father's last gift. Since Jack's death 2 years ago during a classified military operation, Emma had developed an anxiety disorder that manifested in counting rituals and selective mutism around strangers. The psychologist called it adjustment disorder with anxiety. Jessica called it heartbreak. Emma watched her mother with those penetrating blue-green eyes, absorbing every wince of pain, every tear hastily wiped away. The worn leather satchel containing Jessica's résumé sat between them like a broken promise. 3 miles across town, in a sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city, Matthew Reynolds adjusted his prosthetic leg with practiced movements. At 38, the former Marine captain's dark hair was already streaked with premature gray at the temples, a souvenir from the IED explosion that had taken his left leg below the knee 3 years ago. His Reynolds Veterans Foundation had become his life's purpose, connecting veterans with employment, health care, and support services. The foundation was his redemption, not just for the men he'd lost under his command, but for his father, another broken soldier who had returned from Vietnam only to lose his battle with PTSD through the barrel of a gun when Matthew was just 12. The newspapers called Matthew a hero. In the privacy of his penthouse apartment, nightmares reminded him he was merely a survivor. In the senior living facility adjacent to the hospital, 78-year-old Eleanor Wilson sat by her window, arthritic fingers arranging and rearranging her pill containers. A forgotten hero of Vietnam, she had treated countless young men on blood-soaked field cots. Now she watched the world through glass, waiting for family visits that grew increasingly rare. Her walls were covered with fading photographs, evidence of a life fully lived, now reduced to a single room and scheduled medication times.
None of these fractured souls knew that before the day ended, their lives would collide in ways that would forever alter their trajectories, all because of one small girl's extraordinary act of courage. Jessica Morgan stared at the ceiling of her hospital room, the morning light filtering through half-drawn blinds, creating patterns that danced across the institutional paint. The phone call replayed in her mind for the 20th time, each repetition more painful than the last. "Mrs. Morgan, this position has over 200 applicants. If you cannot attend your scheduled interview today, we will simply move to the next candidate. We do not reschedule. Thank you for your interest in the Reynolds Veterans Foundation." Click. No opportunity to explain about the pneumonia, the 103-degree fever, the doctor who had threatened to restrain her if she attempted to leave. No chance to tell them how perfectly qualified she was for the Veteran Support Coordinator position, how she had lived the military life, understood the unique challenges facing veterans because she'd seen them firsthand in her husband's eyes. A tear slid down her temple, disappearing into her hairline. The position would have meant everything: health insurance for Emma's therapy, regular hours that would allow her to be home evenings, and most importantly, a salary that would let her quit at least 2 of her current jobs. It would mean dignity again, using her nursing training and military experience rather than scrubbing toilets and serving pancakes to rude customers who never tipped more than 10%. "Mom?" Emma's small voice drew Jessica from her spiral of despair. "Yes, sweetheart?" Jessica worked to keep her voice steady, to hide the devastation from her daughter. "Your medicine is making you sleepy. You should rest." Jessica smiled weakly. 6 years old, and Emma was already the caretaker. "I'm okay, honey. Just disappointed about missing my interview." Emma nodded solemnly, her eyes moving to the worn leather satchel that contained Jessica's carefully prepared résumé, letters of recommendation, and the small note card where she'd practiced answers to potential interview questions. "You worked really hard," Emma said quietly, her fingers twisting the small pebble she always carried in her pocket, a smooth river stone Jack had given her before his last deployment. "Sometimes things just don't work out the way we hope," Jessica replied, hating the lesson she was teaching her daughter. That effort didn't matter. That dreams collapsed under the weight of circumstance. Jessica's eyelids grew heavy as the medication pulled her toward unconsciousness. She fought against it, worried about leaving Emma alone, but the exhaustion was overwhelming. Her last conscious thought was of the rent increase notice waiting on their kitchen counter at home. 60 days to come up with an additional $400 monthly, or find a new place to live. Emma watched as her mother's breathing deepened, signaling she had finally surrendered to sleep. Carefully, silently, she slid from the plastic hospital chair and approached the bed. With gentle fingers, she brushed a strand of blonde hair from her mother's forehead, noting the unnatural warmth of her skin. Emma had heard everything: the phone call, her mother's quiet crying afterward, the whispered prayer that had slipped from Jessica's lips. "Please, not this too. Emma needs this chance. We can't keep going like this." The little girl stood very still, thinking. Her mother had taught her that when faced with a problem, you should consider all possible solutions, even the ones that seemed impossible. That's what brave people did. Emma's eyes fell on the leather satchel. She knew what it contained. She had watched her mother prepare everything, had seen her practice interview questions in front of their bathroom mirror late at night when she thought Emma was asleep. With slow, deliberate movements, Emma opened the bag and carefully extracted the folder containing her mother's résumé. The Reynolds Veterans Foundation, she had memorized the address from the business card pinned to their refrigerator. It wasn't far from the hospital. There was a bus that went right past it. She had seen it from the car window when they drove to her therapy appointments. Her heart pounded as she considered what she was about to do. Speaking to strangers was terrifying. Since her father died, words often stuck in her throat like they were caught behind a wall. Her therapist called it selective mutism, a manifestation of her anxiety. But this wasn't about her. This was about Mom. Emma tucked the folder carefully under her arm, then put on her school cardigan that hung on the back of the chair. Before leaving, she leaned over and whispered in her mother's ear, "I'll help fix it, Mom. I promise." The hospital corridor was busy with morning routines, nurses checking charts, orderlies delivering breakfast trays, doctors making rounds. No one paid attention to a small girl walking purposefully toward the elevator. Emma kept her head high, her steps confident, just like her mother had taught her for situations where she felt scared. Sometimes, Emma, we have to pretend to be brave until the real bravery catches up. The elevator doors opened, and Emma stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. Her stomach felt tight, her hands clammy around the folder, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, counting in her head, 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3. Breathe out. The hospital lobby bustled with activity. Emma navigated through the crowd, her small stature making her nearly invisible among the adults rushing about their business. Outside, the morning air carried the crisp scent of early autumn. Emma spotted the bus stop across the street and waited patiently for the crossing signal. On the bus, she sat primly, the folder balanced carefully on her lap. When the driver glanced at her questioningly, she summoned her voice. "My mom is meeting me," she said softly, the prepared lie feeling strange on her tongue. Her mother had taught her never to lie, but sometimes rules had to bend when the cause was important enough. The driver nodded, seemingly satisfied, and Emma gazed out the window, watching the city pass by, mentally rehearsing what she would say when she arrived. The thought of speaking to strangers made her chest tight, but she pictured her mother's tired face, the way her uniform shoes had holes that she covered with black marker, how she sometimes skipped meals so Emma could have enough. 40 minutes later, Emma stood before the imposing glass building of the Reynolds Veterans Foundation. The structure reached toward the sky, windows gleaming in the morning sunlight. Taking a deep breath, she clutched the folder tighter and walked through the revolving door. The lobby was all marble and steel, with a massive reception desk that rose like a fortress before her. Emma approached slowly, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and a professional smile, was organizing papers and hadn't noticed her yet. Emma cleared her throat softly. The woman looked up, surprise crossing her features as she registered the child standing before her desk. "Hello there," the receptionist said, leaning forward slightly. "Are you lost, sweetie?" Emma shook her head, counted silently to 3, then spoke with careful precision. "I'm here for the job interview." The receptionist, Beth, according to her nameplate, blinked in confusion. "Interview?" Emma nodded and held up the folder. "It's my mom's. She's really good, but she's sick today, so I came instead." Beth's coffee mug slipped from her fingers, splattering across her desk. Around them, several employees slowed their pace, watching the scene unfold with undisguised interest. "What's your name, honey?" Beth asked, recovering her composure. "Emma. Emma Morgan." "And your mom's name?" "Jessica Morgan." Beth quickly scanned her computer screen, her eyes widening slightly. "Yes, Jessica Morgan. Scheduled for 9 a.m. She hesitated, clearly unsure how to proceed. Okay. One moment, Emma." She pressed her earpiece. "Mr. Reynolds, you need to come down here. It's about the 9 interview." It's important. In his top-floor office, Matthew Reynolds was reviewing quarterly reports when his intercom buzzed. Beth's voice had an unusual quality to it, something between amusement and uncertainty. Curious, he rose from his desk, adjusting his prosthetic leg before making his way to the elevator. Matthew had built his reputation on discipline and no-nonsense leadership. Former Marines respected structure, and he ran his foundation with military precision. The staff called him demanding but fair. They didn't see the nightmares that plagued his sleep or the phantom pain that sometimes had him gripping his desk until his knuckles turned white. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Matthew stepped out, expecting perhaps a distinguished veteran or an important donor. Instead, his gaze landed on a little girl, standing straight-backed before the reception desk, a large folder clutched in her small hands. For a moment he froze, the unexpected sight triggering a memory from Afghanistan. A child about the same age, standing amid the rubble after an explosion, holding a singed photograph with the same solemn dignity. "Sir?" Beth's voice pulled him back to the present. "This is Emma Morgan. She's here for her mother's interview." Matthew approached slowly, conscious of how his imposing height and military bearing might intimidate a child. "Hello, Emma," he said, softening his voice. "I'm Matthew Reynolds." Emma looked up at him, her blue-green eyes assessing him with startling intensity. She didn't shrink back as most children did when confronted with his formal demeanor. Instead, she stepped forward and extended the folder. "My mom has pneumonia. She's in the hospital, but she really needs this job. She's a really good nurse. She helps soldiers like you." Matthew felt something shift inside his chest, a feeling he couldn't immediately identify. He accepted the folder, noting how carefully it had been prepared, despite the slight creasing from its journey in Emma's small hands. "Your mom was a military nurse?" he asked, opening the folder. Emma nodded. "In Afghanistan. She saved lots of people. Now she works 3 jobs and sometimes doesn't sleep much." Matthew scanned the resume, his trained eye quickly absorbing Jessica Morgan's qualifications. Former military nurse with 2 tours in Afghanistan. Honorable discharge. Extensive experience with trauma care. Excellent recommendations. A gap in employment after her discharge, then a scattered work history of jobs far below her qualification level. "Why did your mom leave the military, Emma?" he asked gently. Emma's fingers found the small pebble in her pocket, rubbing it as she answered. "My dad died. He was a soldier, too. Mom said she needed to take care of me." Matthew nodded, understanding immediately. He'd seen it many times, the difficult choices military families made, the sacrifices that went unnoticed by civilians. "And she's sick now?" "She has pneumonia," Emma said, struggling slightly with the word. "The doctor said she pushed herself too hard. She was really sad about missing the interview." Around them, the lobby had grown quiet, employees pretending to go about their business while straining to hear the unusual exchange. Matthew was suddenly aware of being the center of attention, but for once he didn't mind. Something about this child's courage demanded recognition. He made a decision. "Beth, clear my schedule for the next 15 minutes. Beth raised her eyebrows but nodded. "Yes, sir." Matthew gestured toward the hallway. "Would you like to come to my office, Emma? We can talk about your mom there." Emma nodded solemnly and fell into step beside him, matching his pace despite her much shorter legs. In the elevator she stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the illuminated numbers as they ascended to the top floor. Matthew found himself studying her profile, the determined set of her small jaw, the careful way she held herself, the slight tremor in her hands that betrayed her nervousness despite her composed exterior. This was a child who had learned to be brave far too young. His office was spacious and austere, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Matthew pulled out a chair for Emma, watching as she climbed up and settled herself, feet dangling well above the floor. "So, Emma," he began, sitting across from her, "tell me about your mom. Why does she want to work here? Emma took a breath, and Matthew noticed her counting silently before speaking, a coping mechanism he recognized from his own therapy sessions. Mom wants to help veterans again, she said. She misses it. She says civilian jobs aren't the same because people don't understand what soldiers go through. Emma paused, then added, she has nightmares sometimes, like the soldiers she used to help. Matthew nodded, surprised by the child's insight. What kind of nightmares? About the people she couldn't save, Emma replied simply. She talks in her sleep. The candor struck Matthew like a physical blow. How many nights had he woken in a cold sweat, the names of fallen comrades on his lips? Your mom sounds like a very special person, he said. Emma nodded. She is. She works really hard. She never buys anything for herself, even when her shoes have holes. She fixes them with a black marker so people can't tell. Her voice dropped lower. She thinks I don't notice when she doesn't eat dinner so I can have the last chicken nuggets. Matthew felt his throat tighten. The picture Emma painted was achingly familiar. The invisible struggles of so many veterans and their families, fighting battles on the home front that were often harder than those on the battlefield. What would this job mean for your mom, Emma? He asked. The little girl's face brightened slightly. She says it would mean only one job instead of 3, and weekends off. Emma's voice took on a wistful quality. Mom says if she could take me to the park on Saturdays like normal families, she'd be the happiest mom in the world. Something about the simplicity of that dream, not wealth or status, just time with her child, struck Matthew deeply. He thought about his own penthouse apartment, filled with expensive furniture but devoid of family photos or children's laughter. Emma, he said carefully, I think your mom might be exactly the kind of person we need here. Emma's eyes widened. Really? Really. Matthew nodded, making a decision that felt right in a way few things had recently. Where is your mom now? Which hospital? Memorial? Room 312, Emma replied promptly. Matthew pressed his intercom. Beth, please have my car brought around and find out if we can send flowers to Memorial Hospital, room 312. He turned back to Emma, who was watching him with cautious hope. I think we should go see your mom, don't you? I'd like to meet the woman who raised such a brave daughter. For the first time since she'd arrived, Emma smiled, a real smile that transformed her solemn face into that of a normal 6-year-old girl. She's going to be surprised, she said, with the first hint of childish mischief. Matthew found himself smiling in return. I imagine she will be. Jessica Morgan awoke with a start, her heart racing as she realized she'd fallen asleep. Her first panicked thought was of Emma, and she jerked upright, eyes scanning the room. The plastic chair where her daughter had been sitting was empty. Emma? Her voice was hoarse, throat raw from coughing. No answer. Jessica fumbled for the call button, her fingers trembling. Before she could press it, the door to her room swung open. A nurse entered carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. These just arrived for you, Mrs. Morgan, she said, setting them on the bedside table. Quite lovely, aren't they? Jessica stared at the flowers in confusion. There must be some mistake. Nobody would... She stopped as she noticed a small envelope nestled among the blooms. Have you seen my daughter? 6 years old? Brown hair? The nurse's brow furrowed. I'm sorry, I just came on shift. Let me check with the front desk. She exited, leaving Jessica alone with the mysterious flowers. With shaking hands, Jessica reached for the envelope and withdrew a simple card. The handwriting was precise, almost military in its neatness. To the strongest woman I've yet to meet. Looking forward to speaking with you in person. Matthew Reynolds. Reynolds Veterans Foundation. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. Reynolds Veterans Foundation. Her interview. But how did they know she was here? Why would they send flowers after she'd missed her appointment? The door opened again, and Jessica looked up expectantly, hoping for news about Emma. Instead, she froze as a tall man in a tailored suit entered. His dark hair was sprinkled with premature gray, his posture military straight despite a slight asymmetry in his gait that spoke of a prosthetic leg. Behind him, small and triumphant, came Emma. "Mom!" Emma rushed forward, climbing onto the bed with unusual animation. "I did your interview." Jessica's mouth fell open as she looked from her daughter to the imposing figure now standing at the foot of her bed. "You... what?" "Mrs. Morgan," the man said, extending his hand. "Matthew Reynolds. Your daughter made quite an impression this morning." Jessica felt like she was hallucinating, a side effect of her medication, perhaps. She took his offered hand automatically, noting the strength in his grip. "I don't understand." Matthew's expression softened slightly. "Your daughter arrived at my office this morning with your resume. She explained you were ill and conducted what I must say was one of the most compelling interviews I've ever experienced." Heat rose in Jessica's cheeks, embarrassment, confusion, and the lingering effects of her fever. "Emma, you didn't... please tell me you didn't take a bus by yourself." The thought of her 6-year-old navigating the city alone sent cold fear through her veins. Emma's face fell slightly. "I had to, Mom." "You were so sad about missing your chance." Jessica pulled her daughter close, torn between pride at her courage and terror at the risks she'd taken. "You could have been hurt. Anything could have happened." "Nothing did, though," Emma said with simple logic. "And Mr. Reynolds came to meet you." Jessica looked up at Matthew, mortification washing over her. "Mr. Reynolds, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. This is completely unprofessional and inappropriate and..." "Extraordinary," Matthew interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "It's extraordinary. In fact, it made me realize how much our organization needs someone like you." Jessica blinked, certain she had misheard. "Excuse me?" Matthew pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat, bringing himself to eye level. "Mrs. Morgan, Jessica, please." "Jessica," he amended with a slight nod. "Your resume is impressive. 2 tours in Afghanistan, extensive trauma experience, excellent recommendations. But your daughter told me something your resume doesn't, about your character, your work ethic, the sacrifices you make daily." He paused. "Those are qualities I value more than any credential." Jessica felt tears threatening and fought them back. She wouldn't cry in front of this man, this potential employer who had somehow materialized in her hospital room because her 6-year-old had taken matters into her own small hands. "The position is still open?" she managed to ask. "It is now," Matthew replied with the ghost of a smile. "I'd like to offer you the role of Veteran Support Coordinator. The salary is $65,000 annually, with full benefits that would begin immediately. The hours are Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, with no weekend requirements except for occasional special events." Jessica's mind reeled at the figure, more than double what she currently pieced together from her 3 jobs combined. Health insurance, regular hours, weekends with Emma. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. "Why?" she asked, unable to stop herself. "Why would you offer me this without a proper interview? Without checking references, without..." "Because I recognize something," Matthew interrupted. His eyes drifted to Emma, then back to Jessica. "When your daughter walked into my office holding your resume, she showed more courage than many adults I've known. That kind of bravery, that determination, it doesn't come from nowhere." His gaze intensified. "It comes from example." Jessica swallowed hard against the lump forming in her throat. "Besides," Matthew continued, "I did check one reference." He tapped Jessica's resume. "Dr. Eleanor Wilson. She's listed here as your former supervisor in the military." "You know Eleanor?" Jessica asked, surprised. "I made a call while my assistant was arranging the flowers," Matthew explained. She couldn't say enough good things about you. In fact, she told me, and I quote, "If you don't hire that girl Matthew Reynolds, you're a bigger fool than the government that let her go." Despite everything, Jessica laughed. That sounded exactly like Eleanor, direct, no-nonsense Eleanor, who had taught Jessica everything she knew about battlefield medicine and stoic compassion. "Eleanor's actually a patient here," Jessica said. "She fell last week and broke her hip. I've been checking on her when I can. She's just down the hall in the geriatric ward." Matthew's eyebrows rose. "I'd like to thank her in person, if possible." "I think she'd like that," Jessica replied, then hesitated. "Mr. Reynolds—" "Matthew, please." "Matthew," she corrected herself. "This is all happening very fast. I'm grateful, truly, but I need to be honest with you. I'm a single mother with a child who needs therapy for anxiety. I've been out of the military medical system for 2 years. I might not be what you're expecting." Matthew's expression didn't change. "Jessica, our foundation exists to help veterans rebuild their lives after service. That includes veterans like you who left to care for family. You understand both worlds, military and civilian. That perspective is invaluable." Emma, who had been quietly listening to the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Does this mean we get to go to the park on Saturdays?" Jessica felt her heart constrict at the simple question, at how little her daughter asked for, how modest her dreams had become in their struggle to survive. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "I think it does." Matthew cleared his throat, and Jessica was surprised to see a flicker of emotion cross his usually composed features. "The doctor says you'll need at least 3 more days here," he said. "The physician will be waiting when you're recovered. No rush." Jessica nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. "Thank you," she said, the words wholly inadequate for what she was feeling. "I don't know how to—" "Mom," Emma interrupted, pointing to the door. "Look who's here." Jessica turned to see an elderly woman in a wheelchair being pushed into the room by a nurse. Despite her frail appearance and the hospital gown, Eleanor Wilson's back was ramrod straight, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun, her blue eyes sharp as ever. "Well, well," Eleanor said, her voice cracking but authoritative. "If it isn't the great Matthew Reynolds himself, gracing us mere mortals with his presence." Matthew stood immediately, military respect evident in his posture. "Dr. Wilson, it's an honor to meet you in person." Eleanor snorted. "Save the formalities for the fundraising galas, young man. I hear you've finally had the good sense to hire Jessica." "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Took you long enough." Eleanor turned her attention to Jessica. "This one's got a good heart under all that starch and ceremony." "His father served with my husband in Vietnam. Different kind of war, same kind of wounds." Jessica looked at Matthew in surprise. He hadn't mentioned any personal connection. "I didn't realize," Matthew said quietly. "Your husband was Thomas Wilson, the MASH surgeon?" Eleanor nodded, a flash of old pain crossing her features. 30 years together after the war, and he still woke up screaming some nights. Sound familiar, Captain Reynolds? Matthew didn't answer, but Jessica saw the slight tightening of his jaw. She recognized the signs, the careful control, the compartmentalization that every soldier learned to survive. "Eleanor," Jessica said gently, "how did you get down here? Should you be out of bed with your hip?" "Pah!" Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Nurse Jenkins owed me a favor. Besides, I wanted to see the man who's going to fix what the military broke." Her gaze shifted to Emma, and her expression softened. "And I wanted to see this brave little general who took matters into her own hands." She beckoned Emma closer. "Come here, child." Emma approached the wheelchair cautiously. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know what I always say. Sometimes the smallest soldiers fight the biggest battles. She pressed something into Emma's palm. This was my good luck charm in Vietnam. I think you should have it now. Jessica craned her neck to see what Eleanor had given her daughter. It was a small pin, a caduceus, the symbol of the medical corps, worn smooth by decades of handling. Thank you, Emma said solemnly, closing her fingers around the gift. Eleanor nodded, satisfied, then turned back to Matthew. Now, young man, I expect you to take good care of our Jessica. She's worth 10 of most people I've known, and I've known plenty. Yes, ma'am, Matthew replied, and Jessica was startled to see a genuine smile transform his usually serious face. I believe you're right about that. Eleanor's nurse appeared at the door. Dr. Wilson, we need to get you back for your medication. Eleanor sighed dramatically. The warden calls. Jessica, I'll see you tomorrow. Captain Reynolds, don't be a stranger. She fixed him with a pointed look. This old warhorse still has wisdom to share, if you've got the sense to listen. As the nurse wheeled Eleanor away, a thoughtful silence fell over the room. Emma had climbed back onto Jessica's bed, carefully pinning Eleanor's caduceus to her school cardigan. She's quite something, Matthew finally said. She is, Jessica agreed. She taught me everything I know about emergency medicine and stubbornness. Matthew chuckled, the sound surprisingly warm from a man who seemed so controlled. I should let you rest, he said, standing. My assistant will be in touch about paperwork and your start date. He hesitated, then added, And, Jessica, thank you for your service. Both in uniform and after. The simple acknowledgment, so rarely offered to those who left the military for family obligations, caught Jessica off guard. Her eyes welled with tears she could no longer hold back. Thank you for seeing its value, she replied softly. Matthew nodded, then turned to Emma. And thank you, Miss Morgan, for being the bravest interviewer I've ever met. Emma beamed, her usual reserve momentarily forgotten. Will I get to see your office again? Any time, Matthew promised. In fact, there's a desk in the corner that might be perfect for homework after school. After he left, Jessica pulled Emma close, inhaling the familiar scent of her daughter's hair. You could have been hurt, she murmured. Promise me you'll never do something like that again. I promise, Emma said, then added with perfect 6-year-old logic, but I don't have to now. You got the job. Jessica laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. How long had it been since she'd truly laughed? Yes, I suppose I did. As Emma nestled against her, Jessica's gaze fell on the wild flowers Matthew had sent. Such a small gesture, yet it represented something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope, not just for survival, but for something more. A life where she could use her skills again, where Emma could have a childhood not overshadowed by constant financial stress, where weekends meant parks instead of extra shifts. Outside her window, the afternoon sun broke through clouds, casting golden light across her hospital bed. For the first time since Jack's death, Jessica Morgan felt the weight on her shoulders lighten, just a little, just enough to take a full breath. And in that moment, it was enough. Jessica Morgan stood in front of the imposing glass doors of the Reynolds Veterans Foundation, her reflection staring back at her with an uncertainty she was desperately trying to conceal. Her navy blue blazer, purchased from a thrift store and carefully tailored by her own hands, sat a little loose on her frame, a reminder of the weight she'd lost during her hospital stay. She'd splurged on a new pair of sensible heels, the first new shoes she'd bought herself in over 2 years. You can do this, she whispered to herself, adjusting the strap of her new messenger bag, a gift from Eleanor, who had insisted Jessica couldn't start a professional job carrying that war-torn relic you call a purse. Taking a deep breath, Jessica pushed through the revolving door into the cool, air-conditioned lobby. The marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting, and the large reception desk where Emma had first made her stand was now staffed by Beth, who looked up with a warm smile of recognition. "Mrs. Morgan, welcome to your first day," Beth greeted her, coming around the desk to shake her hand. "Everyone's been looking forward to meeting you. Emma's interview is practically legend around here already." Jessica felt her cheeks flush. "I'm still mortified about that, to be honest." "Don't be," Beth assured her. "It was the most genuine thing I've seen in this corporate environment in years." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "And between us, seeing Mr. Reynolds completely knocked off his game was worth the price of admission alone." Jessica couldn't help but smile at that. The formidable Matthew Reynolds, thrown off balance by a determined 6-year-old. It was an image she'd replayed in her mind often during her recovery. "I'll take you upstairs to meet the team," Beth continued, guiding Jessica toward the elevator. "Mr. Reynolds has a meeting this morning, but he asked me to get you settled in." As they ascended to the 14th floor, Jessica worked to calm her nerves. She had faced Taliban insurgents and performed emergency surgeries under mortar fire, yet somehow this return to professional life terrified her more than any battlefield. The elevator doors opened onto an open-concept office space with glass-walled conference rooms along the perimeter. Men and women in business casual attire moved purposefully between desks, many sporting the telltale signs of military background: the straight posture, the efficient movements, the haircuts that, while civilian, still hinted at regulation styles. "Everyone," Beth announced, her voice carrying across the space. "This is Jessica Morgan, our new Veteran Support Coordinator." Heads turned, and Jessica found herself the focus of curious stares. She recognized the assessment in their eyes, the same evaluation she'd experienced countless times as a female in military spaces. Was she qualified? Was she here on merit or as some diversity initiative? Could she handle the job? A tall woman with short-cropped silver hair approached first, extending her hand. "Linda Blackwell, Mental Health Services, Marine Corps, 20 years. Welcome aboard." "Jessica Morgan, Army Nurse Corps, 2 tours in Afghanistan. Thank you." The handshake was firm, the eye contact direct. Jessica felt something in her chest relax slightly. This, at least, was familiar territory, the straightforward communication of military personnel. More introductions followed. James Chen from Housing Assistance, former Navy. Marcus Watkins from the VA Liaison Office. Army Ranger Dina Rodriguez, Employment Outreach, Air Force. Each greeting carried the same unspoken understanding, the shorthand of shared experience. Then a younger woman approached, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Sarah Pierce, Mr. Reynolds' executive assistant. I handle his schedule and priorities." Her handshake was brief, her assessment cool. "I understand you have unusual circumstances surrounding your hiring." Jessica felt the subtle barb, but kept her expression neutral. "My daughter is certainly unconventional in her approach," she replied evenly. Sarah's smile tightened. "Yes, well, Mr. Reynolds is very particular about professionalism. I'm sure you'll adjust quickly to our standards here." Before Jessica could respond, Beth interjected, "Let me show you to your office, Jessica." As they walked away, Jessica felt Sarah's gaze boring into her back. "Don't mind Sarah," Beth murmured. "She's protective of Matthew, Mr. Reynolds." They've worked together since he founded the organization. Jessica's office was modest but well-appointed, with a window overlooking the city and walls adorned with photographs of veterans being served by the foundation. A sleek computer sat on the desk alongside a neat stack of folders. "These are your first cases," Beth explained, gesturing to the files. 10 veterans recently discharged, all dealing with transition issues, housing, healthcare, employment. Matthew thought you might want to start with medical advocacy since that aligns with your background. Jessica picked up the top folder, opening it to find a detailed case file for a female Army specialist struggling to get proper care for service-related injuries. The familiar frustration rose in her chest, the same battles she'd fought for herself, now laid out in another soldier's paperwork. "Thank you, Beth."
"This looks perfect." After Beth left, Jessica settled behind her desk, taking a moment to absorb the reality of where she sat. From hospital beds in Afghanistan to 3 menial jobs to this, an office with her name on the door, doing work that mattered. It seemed surreal. She opened her messenger bag and carefully placed 2 framed photographs on her desk. One of Emma at her kindergarten graduation, gap-toothed and beaming, the other of Jack in his dress uniform, his arm around Jessica, both of them young and unaware of the heartbreak ahead. She positioned them carefully, then turned to her computer to begin. By lunchtime, Jessica had already made significant progress on her first case, identifying 3 policy violations in how the female veteran's claims had been processed and drafting a formal appeal letter. The work absorbed her completely, reminding her of the purpose she'd felt in the military, the sense that her actions directly improved others' lives. A knock at her door pulled her from her concentration. She looked up to see Matthew Reynolds standing in the doorway, his posture military straight as always, but his expression less severe than she remembered from the hospital. "Jessica, how's your first morning going?" "Good," she replied, straightening in her chair. "Great. Actually, these cases, there's so much that can be done with the right advocacy." Matthew nodded, entering the office. "That's exactly why this position is crucial. Too many veterans get lost in the system because they don't have someone who understands both sides, military and medical." He glanced at her computer screen, noting the detailed appeal she'd drafted. "You work quickly." "Some skills translate well from battlefield medicine," Jessica said with a small smile. "Efficiency under pressure, identifying critical issues, documentation that can stand up to scrutiny." Something flickered across Matthew's face, recognition, perhaps, or memory.
"Would you like to join me for lunch? There's a cafe downstairs. I try to check in with all new team members on their first day." Jessica hesitated, acutely aware of her budget constraints. "I actually brought lunch," she admitted, gesturing to the brown paper bag in her drawer. "My treat," Matthew insisted. "Consider it an official welcome." 20 minutes later, they sat at a small table in the building's cafe, Jessica with a chicken Caesar salad and Matthew with a turkey sandwich. The conversation flowed more easily than Jessica had expected, covering the Foundation's current initiatives, her initial impressions, and practical matters like Emma's after-school arrangements. "The school has an aftercare program until 5:30, Jessica explained. "It's an extra expense, but it gives me flexibility if meetings run late." Matthew nodded. "What about summer? School ends in a few weeks." Jessica felt a flicker of anxiety. She hadn't gotten that far in her planning yet.
"I'm researching camps. There are a few with financial aid options. We have a program for employees," Matthew offered, "a partnership with the YMCA for children of veterans, full-day summer programs, fully covered. I should have mentioned it earlier." Relief washed over Jessica. That would be incredibly helpful. As their lunch continued, Jessica found herself studying Matthew when he wasn't looking directly at her. In the hospital, she'd been too overwhelmed by circumstances to really observe him. Now she noticed the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of chronic pain, the way he unconsciously adjusted his position to accommodate his prosthetic, the reflexive scan of the room's exits, all familiar behaviors of veterans carrying invisible wounds. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured during a lull in conversation. Matthew looked up from his sandwich, eyebrows raised slightly. "You can ask. I reserve the right not to answer." "Fair enough," Jessica conceded.
How long have you had the prosthetic?" If the question surprised him, he didn't show it. 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days, he replied with military precision. IED on a road outside Kandahar. Jessica nodded, respecting the brevity of his answer. Every veteran had their own way of carrying their story, their own boundaries around when and how much to share. "I was there," she said quietly. "Not for your incident, but in that region, the field hospital at Camp Dwyer." Matthew's eyes sharpened with interest. "Dwyer? When?" 2018 through early 2020. My second tour." A strange expression crossed Matthew's face. "What month did you leave in 2020? "February. Right after—" Jessica stopped, the familiar tightness gripping her chest at the memory of those final weeks, the notification of Jack's death, the blur of grief and paperwork and hurried departure. Matthew was watching her intently now. "I was brought to Dwyer in January 2020, after the IED. I don't remember much from those first days. Heavy sedation." Jessica's mind raced through the blur of patients from that chaotic time. "I worked Trauma Unit B. If you came through there, I might have been one of your nurses." "I was told a nurse stayed with me through the worst of it," Matthew said slowly. "Kept me talking, kept me alive until they could stabilize me for transport. I never knew her name." A chill ran down Jessica's spine. The military was both vast and surprisingly small. Connections and crossed paths often revealed themselves years later in unexpected ways. She'd treated hundreds of wounded soldiers. He'd been just one of countless casualties that winter. "I'm sorry I don't remember you specifically," she said honestly. "Those weeks were difficult for many reasons." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "No apology needed. We all carried out our duties as best we could." He glanced at his watch. "We should head back." "You have an orientation meeting with Linda at 1:30. As they rode the elevator back to the 14th floor, Jessica felt a shift in the air between them, a new awareness, the possibility that their paths had crossed before Emma's desperate mission brought them together again. The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings, systems training, and introductions. By 5 o'clock, Jessica's head was swimming with new information. But a sense of satisfaction had settled deep in her bones. This work, helping veterans navigate the labyrinthine systems of civilian life, felt right in a way her recent jobs never had. As she packed up to leave, Sarah appeared in her doorway, arms crossed. "Mr. Reynolds asked me to give you this," she said, extending a small envelope. "Your building access card and security protocols." "Thank you," Jessica replied, accepting the envelope. She couldn't quite read the younger woman's expression, something between resentment and curiosity. "He doesn't usually take new hires to lunch," Sarah remarked, her tone carefully neutral. Jessica met her gaze directly. "I imagine he makes exceptions for people whose children ambush him with resumes." A flash of something, amusement perhaps, crossed Sarah's face before her professional mask returned. "Perhaps? Just remember, he built this foundation from nothing after his injury. It's his life's work, not a charity case repository." The implication stung, but Jessica kept her expression composed. "I'm not here for charity, Sarah. I'm here to do a job I'm qualified for." Sarah studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "We'll see." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Matthew mentioned your daughter might need after-school arrangements occasionally. If she needs to come here, she'll need a visitor badge from reception each time." The simple accommodation, the acknowledgement that Emma might sometimes need to be here, caught Jessica off guard. "Thank you." I'll remember that." As Jessica made her way through the now quieter office toward the elevator, She noticed Matthew in one of the glass-walled conference rooms, deep in conversation with an older man in an expensive suit. The strain in Matthew's posture was visible even from a distance, his jaw tight, his shoulders rigid with tension. Before she could look away, Matthew glanced up and saw her. Something shifted in his expression, a momentary softening before he returned his attention to what appeared to be a difficult conversation. Outside, the spring afternoon was warm and bright as Jessica walked to the bus stop. For the first time in years, she'd be home before Emma's bedtime without having to rush to a second job. The realization brought an unexpected lump to her throat. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, Emma's after-school caregiver. Emma had a good day, drawing pictures of her mom's new office. Very proud. Jessica smiled, her heart swelling. Whatever challenges lay ahead in this new position, whatever friction with Sarah or complexities with Matthew, one thing was certain: this chance had already changed Emma's world. For that alone, she would make this work. As her bus approached, Jessica caught her reflection in the glass of the bus shelter. For the first time in a long while, the woman looking back at her resembled the confident nurse she'd once been, not the exhausted shell she'd become. She stood a little straighter, lifted her chin a bit higher. "First step," she whispered to herself, boarding the bus with newfound determination. Just the first step. Across town, in his penthouse apartment overlooking the city, Matthew Reynolds poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and sank into his leather armchair, finally allowing his prosthetic leg to be removed. The phantom pain that had been building all day flared as he massaged his residual limb, his face contorting briefly before he mastered the sensation. On his coffee table lay a folder, not a work file but a personal one. Inside were photographs and documents he'd reviewed countless times: the after-action report from the IED incident, medical records from Camp Dwyer, and a list of personnel stationed there in January 2020. Matthew's fingers traced over a name he'd circled in red: Capt. Jessica Morgan, RN. "It was you," he murmured to the empty room. "All this time, it was you." 3 months after Jessica began working at the Reynolds Veterans Foundation, the rhythm of her new life had begun to feel almost natural. Each morning she walked Emma to the YMCA summer program before continuing to the office. Each evening they returned to their apartment, the same small 2-bedroom they'd struggled to afford before, but now without the constant fear of eviction hanging over them. Today, however, broke that comfortable pattern. Jessica stood in the Foundation's largest conference room, her heart hammering against her ribs as she prepared to present her findings to the board of directors. 12 stern-faced men and women, most former military officers or business executives, who controlled the Foundation's substantial funding. "You've got this," Matthew murmured as he passed behind her, arranging papers at the head of the table. "Just like we practiced." Jessica nodded, grateful for his confidence but acutely aware of what was at stake. Over the past weeks, she had uncovered a disturbing pattern in how female veterans' medical claims were being processed, or rather, systematically delayed and denied. What had begun as advocacy for individual cases had evolved into a comprehensive investigation revealing gender-based discrimination embedded in the VA's procedural guidelines. The boardroom doors opened and the directors filed in, their expressions ranging from polite interest to barely concealed skepticism. Jessica recognized several from photographs in the Foundation lobby: retired generals, corporate CEOs, old money philanthropists whose support had built the organization from the ground up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Matthew began once everyone was seated, his voice carrying the natural authority of command. "Thank you for adjusting your schedules for this special presentation. As you know, our mission is to ensure all veterans receive the support and benefits they've earned through their service. Today, Jessica Morgan, Our Veteran Support Coordinator will present findings that suggest we're failing a significant portion of those we aim to serve." He nodded to Jessica, ceding the floor with a confidence that bolstered her own. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "Good morning. 3 months ago, I began working with a female Army specialist who was struggling to receive treatment for service-connected injuries. Her case seemed straightforward: extensive documentation, clear connection to her deployment activities, multiple medical opinions supporting her claim. Yet she had been denied benefits 3 times. Jessica clicked to her first slide, displaying a comparison of nearly identical cases. One male, one female, with dramatically different outcomes. This discrepancy wasn't an anomaly. After reviewing 278 cases processed through our regional VA office over the past 2 years, I found that female veterans wait an average of 142 days longer for claim resolution, are 34% more likely to have their initial claims denied, and receive approximately 22% less disability compensation for comparable injuries. A murmur rippled through the room. Jessica continued, methodically presenting her evidence, statistics, case studies, procedural analyses, building an irrefutable case for systemic bias. The practical impact of these disparities extends beyond financial hardship, she explained, her voice growing stronger with conviction. Delayed medical care means worsening conditions. Reduced compensation means choosing between treatment and basic necessities. For female veterans already struggling with transition, these additional barriers can mean the difference between successful reintegration and homelessness, or worse. The oldest board member, a retired admiral with snow-white hair, leaned forward. "These are serious allegations, Mrs. Morgan. Have you shared these findings with the VA directly?" "Not yet, sir. I wanted to present them to this board first, as any official communication would carry the Foundation's name." "And what exactly are you proposing we do?" asked a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit. Patricia Holloway, CEO of a defense contracting firm and one of the Foundation's largest donors. Jessica exchanged a quick glance with Matthew before responding. "I'm proposing a 3-pronged approach. First, immediate advocacy for the individual cases we've identified. Second, a formal report to the VA Inspector General documenting these systemic issues. And third, a public awareness campaign highlighting the unique challenges female veterans face in accessing benefits." The room fell silent. Jessica could feel the weight of their assessment, not just of her proposal, but of her, a newcomer, suggesting the Foundation take a potentially controversial public stance. Patricia Holloway's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the polished table. "A public campaign could jeopardize our working relationship with the VA. They don't respond well to being embarrassed in the media." "With respect, Ms. Holloway," Jessica replied, meeting the woman's gaze directly, "our relationship with the VA shouldn't come at the expense of the veterans we serve." "Bold words from someone who's been here barely 3 months, remarked another board member, his tone dismissive. Matthew cleared his throat. "Jessica's observations align with concerns our team has noted for years, though never with this level of documentation. I believe her recommendations merit serious consideration." The Admiral studied Jessica thoughtfully. "You were military yourself, correct?" "Yes, sir. Army Nurse Corps. 2 tours in Afghanistan." "And did you experience this type of discrimination firsthand?" Jessica hesitated, acutely aware that her personal experience could either strengthen her argument or be used to dismiss her as emotionally biased. "When my husband was killed in action and I requested discharge to care for our daughter, I was denied my full benefits despite an exemplary service record," she answered carefully. "At the time, I assumed it was standard procedure. Now, comparing my case to similar situations involving male service members, I recognize the disparity. The Admiral nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Sometimes it takes a personal stake to recognize systemic failure. Before further discussion could unfold, the boardroom door opened. Sarah Pierce entered, her usual composure noticeably absent as she hurried to Matthew's side and whispered urgently in his ear. Matthew's expression shifted from annoyance at the interruption to concern. He glanced at Jessica, then addressed the board. "I apologize, but we need to take a brief recess. An urgent situation requires immediate attention." As the board members rose, murmuring among themselves, Matthew beckoned Jessica to follow him into the hallway. "What's happening?" she asked once they were out of earshot. "There's been an incident at the YMCA summer program," Matthew said, his voice low. "Emma's missing." Jessica felt the blood drain from her face. "What? How? When?" They realized during the afternoon head count. She was present at lunch but absent when they regrouped for swimming at 2:30. They've searched the facility but can't locate her. Jessica's mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Emma, with her anxiety disorder and selective mutism, alone somewhere. Emma approached by a stranger. Emma, frightened and unable to call for help. "I have to go," she managed, already turning toward the elevator. "My car is downstairs," Matthew said, keeping pace with her despite his prosthetic. "I'll drive you." In the elevator, Jessica fumbled with her phone, calling the YMCA director for more details. The woman's voice was apologetic but provided little new information. Emma had been participating normally in activities all morning, had eaten lunch with her usual group, and then simply wasn't present when the children lined up for swimming. "Has anyone checked if she tried to come here?" Jessica asked suddenly. "She knows where the office is." "I'll call Beth at reception," Matthew replied, already dialing. The brief conversation confirmed that Emma hadn't appeared at the Foundation offices. The drive to the YMCA took only 12 minutes, but to Jessica, it felt like hours. Every red light was an eternity, every block a mile. She tried to control her breathing, to think rationally, but panic clawed at her throat. She wouldn't just wander off, Jessica said, half to herself. She's cautious by nature. Something must have happened. Someone must have said something to upset her. Matthew's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Kids her age don't get far on their own. She's smart, Jessica. She knows her address, your phone number." "But she might not ask for help," Jessica replied, the reality of Emma's condition hitting her anew. If she's anxious enough, she goes nonverbal. She might not be able to tell someone who she is or who to call. As they pulled into the YMCA parking lot, Jessica spotted police cars and felt her heart constrict. The summer program director, a young woman named Alicia, hurried to meet them as they exited the car. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm so sorry. We've checked everywhere. All classrooms, bathrooms, storage areas. The police are taking statements from the other children now." Jessica fought to maintain composure. "I need to see where she was last. Her belongings, her lunch spot, everything." Inside, the summer program was in controlled chaos. Children had been gathered in the gymnasium, seated in their activity groups while officers spoke with counselors. Jessica scanned the room automatically, irrationally hoping Emma would somehow materialize among her peers. "Her backpack is still here," Alicia said, leading them to a row of cubbies. Jessica recognized Emma's navy blue backpack with its small caduceus pin, Eleanor's gift, affixed to the front pocket. Jessica opened it with shaking hands. Emma's lunch container was inside, emptied of the sandwich and apple she'd packed that morning. Her drawing pad was there too, and Jessica flipped through it, looking for any clue. The most recent drawings caught her attention, detailed sketches of an elderly woman that Jessica immediately recognized as Eleanor Wilson. Several pages of Eleanor in her wheelchair, Eleanor smiling, Eleanor's hands holding something Jessica couldn't quite make out. "She's been drawing Eleanor," Jessica murmured. "She hasn't even seen her since—" She stopped abruptly, a possibility dawning. "Matthew, what if she went to visit Eleanor?" "At the senior living facility?" Matthew asked, already pulling out his phone. "That's over a mile from here. She knows the way. We visited every weekend when Eleanor was recovering from her hip surgery." Jessica's mind raced. "And yesterday, Eleanor called to tell me she wasn't feeling well. I mentioned it at breakfast while Emma was getting ready. I said I wished I could visit but couldn't miss today's board meeting." Matthew was already dialing, asking for Eleanor Wilson's room. The seconds of waiting stretched unbearably until finally a nurse answered. "This is Matthew Reynolds. I'm trying to locate a little girl who might have come to visit Eleanor Wilson today." Emma Morgan, 6 years old, brown hair. Jessica held her breath, watching his expression. When relief flooded his features, her knees nearly buckled. "She's there," he confirmed, covering the phone. "Arrived about an hour ago. Eleanor was about to call you, but apparently Emma insisted you were in an important meeting and shouldn't be disturbed." Tears of relief sprang to Jessica's eyes. "Let me talk to her." Matthew handed over the phone, and Jessica heard Eleanor's raspy voice. "Jessica, your little general is safe and sound. Marched right in here like she owned the place, announced you were busy saving the world, and asked if we could have our tea party today instead of Saturday. Nearly gave Nurse Jenkins a heart attack." "Put her on, please," Jessica managed, her voice thick with emotion. A moment later, Emma's small voice came through the line. "Mom? Are you mad?" "Oh, Emma," Jessica breathed, torn between relief and lingering fear. "I was so worried. How did you get there?" "I took the bus," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "The number 17, just like when we visit on Saturdays. I had my emergency $5 in my shoe like you showed me." Jessica closed her eyes, remembering the safety lesson she'd taught Emma. Money hidden in her shoe for true emergencies, never to be used otherwise. "Honey, leaving the YMCA without telling anyone is very dangerous. They called the police because they were so worried." "I left a note," Emma protested. "In my cubby. I wrote that I was visiting Miss Eleanor because she was sick." Jessica looked questioningly at Alicia, who shook her head. "We didn't find any note." "It doesn't matter now," Jessica said into the phone. "Stay with Eleanor. We're coming to get you right away." After alerting the police that Emma had been found, Jessica and Matthew drove to Morningside Senior Living. The relief of knowing Emma was safe had given way to a confusing mix of emotions: gratitude, residual fear, and the nagging question of why Emma had felt compelled to make this journey alone. "She's never done anything like this before," Jessica said as they drove. Except coming to my office with your résumé," Matthew finished. "She seems to have a pattern of taking matters into her own hands when she thinks you need help." Jessica nodded slowly. "Eleanor mentioned she wasn't feeling well when she called yesterday." Emma must have decided it couldn't wait. At Morningside, they were directed to Eleanor's room, where they found an unexpected scene. Emma sitting on the edge of Eleanor's bed, carefully braiding the older woman's thin white hair, while Eleanor appeared to be telling a story, her gnarled hands gesturing animatedly. Both looked up when Jessica and Matthew entered, Emma's expression immediately shifting to contrition while Eleanor simply looked amused. "Mom!" Emma slid off the bed, approaching Jessica cautiously. "I'm sorry about the police. I really did leave a note." Jessica knelt to embrace her daughter, relief temporarily overriding everything else. "We were so worried, Emma. You can't just leave without telling an adult directly." "I know, but Miss Eleanor needed me," Emma replied, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She was crying on the phone yesterday." "I heard her." Jessica glanced at Eleanor, who met her gaze with a defiant lift of her chin despite the obvious fatigue in her eyes. "Eleanor, What's going on? The older woman sighed. Nothing worth sending the cavalry after. Just got some test results back. Nothing they can do at my age anyway. A chill ran through Jessica. What test results? Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. Stage 4. Pancreas. Doctor gives me 3 months, but what do they know? I survived Vietnam. I'll survive this my way. Jessica felt as though she'd been struck. Eleanor, fierce, indomitable Eleanor, looked suddenly smaller in her bed, the vibrant force that had shaped Jessica's military career now visibly diminished. "Why didn't you tell me?" Jessica asked softly. "Because you've had enough on your plate without an old woman's problems," Eleanor replied. "But your little warrior here," she gestured to Emma, "has sharp ears and a stubborn streak that reminds me of someone else I know." Emma moved to stand beside Eleanor's bed, reaching for the older woman's hand with natural affection. "I told Miss Eleanor about your big meeting today, about helping the lady soldiers." Matthew, who had remained quietly by the door, stepped forward. "Dr. Wilson, is there anything you need? Anything the Foundation can assist with?" Eleanor assessed him with the same penetrating gaze Jessica remembered from her earliest days in the service. "What I need, Captain Reynolds, is for Jessica's proposal to be taken seriously. Female veterans have been getting the short end of the stick since before you were born. Maybe it's time someone finally did something about it." Matthew straightened, recognizing the authority in her voice despite her frail appearance. "Yes, ma'am. That's precisely what we intend to do." Eleanor nodded, satisfied, then turned back to Jessica. "Now take your brave girl home. She's had quite the adventure today. And Jessica," her voice softened, "don't you dare start treating me differently. I'm dying, not dead. There's a difference." Jessica could only nod, emotion clogging her throat. In the hallway outside Eleanor's room, Jessica finally gave in to the tears she'd been holding back. Matthew stood nearby, his presence solid and reassuring as she composed herself. "I should have known something was wrong," she said finally. "She's been canceling our weekend visits, saying she was tired." "Cancer is good at hiding until it isn't," Matthew replied quietly. "My father had lung cancer before he stopped, leaving the sentence unfinished. Jessica looked up, surprised by the personal revelation. Matthew rarely spoke about his father. "I'm sorry," she said simply. Matthew nodded, then glanced at Emma, who was watching them both with solemn eyes. "We should get her home. It's been quite a day for everyone." In the car, Emma fell asleep almost immediately, emotionally exhausted from her adventure and its aftermath. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, watching the city pass by as Matthew drove them home. "I never finished my presentation," she realized suddenly. "The board will reconvene next week," Matthew assured her. "Today's events take precedence." Jessica studied his profile, noting the tightness around his eyes that usually indicated he was managing pain. "Thank you for everything today." Matthew glanced at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. "No thanks necessary. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Jessica said softly. "Not anyone." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when Matthew pulled up in front of Jessica's apartment building. "I'll help you get her inside." Together, they managed to transfer the sleeping Emma from car to apartment without waking her. Jessica led the way to Emma's small bedroom, pulling back the covers so Matthew could gently lay her down. The domesticity of the moment, this strong man carefully tucking her daughter in, created an unexpected tightness in Jessica's chest. In the living room, Matthew paused, taking in the modest apartment with its second-hand furniture and carefully maintained order. His gaze lingered on the wall of photographs: Jack in uniform, Emma as a baby, Jessica's graduation from nursing school. Eleanor, in her Vietnam-era uniform, standing beside a much younger Jessica on her first day of military service. "You've built a good life for her," he said quietly, "despite everything." Jessica followed his gaze to the photographs, to the visual history of their little family. "We get by." "More than that," Matthew insisted. "She's extraordinary. That kind of resilience, that empathy, it comes from somewhere." The compliment warmed Jessica in unexpected ways. After Jack's death, she had questioned every parenting decision, wondered constantly if she was doing enough, being enough. To have someone, especially someone like Matthew, recognize her efforts meant more than she could express. "She misses having a father," Jessica admitted. "Jack was wonderful with her, patient, present. He had a way of making her feel safe that I've never quite managed to replicate." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. Children are remarkably adaptable and remarkably perceptive. He hesitated, then added, "She reminds me of myself at that age, watching everything, trying to make sense of an adult world that often doesn't make sense even to adults." The personal insight, freely offered, felt like a gift. "Was that after your father's death?" Matthew's expression closed slightly, but he nodded. "My mother had died years earlier. Cancer, like Eleanor. After my father, well, let's just say the foster care system isn't designed for children who ask too many questions." Jessica thought of Matthew's precise organization, his exacting standards, his careful control, all making more sense now in the context of a child who had learned early that the world was unpredictable and often cruel. "I should go," Matthew said, moving toward the door. "Will you be in tomorrow?" Jessica hesitated, torn between professional responsibility and maternal concern. "I should stay with Emma. After today?" "Of course," Matthew agreed immediately. "Take the day. I'll reschedule the board presentation for early next week." At the door, he paused, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he simply nodded and turned to go. "Matthew," Jessica called softly, stopping him. "When you said anyone would have done what you did today, you're wrong. Not everyone would have dropped everything, driven across town, dealt with police and scared mothers and missed meetings. Thank you for being someone who would." Matthew's expression softened in a way Jessica had rarely seen, vulnerability briefly replacing his customary reserve. "I'll see you Monday, Jessica. Get some rest." After he left, Jessica checked on Emma once more, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's peaceful face. The events of the day, the board presentation, Emma's disappearance, Eleanor's diagnosis, swirled in her mind, too much to process all at once. Yet, amid the chaos, a strange new feeling had taken root. Not just the relief of Emma's safety or the sorrow of Eleanor's illness, but something warmer and more complicated in the space Matthew Reynolds had begun to occupy in their lives. Jessica wasn't ready to name that feeling yet, but for the first time since Jack's death, she allowed herself to acknowledge its possibility. The headaches had begun as an occasional annoyance. Jessica had dismissed them as stress, lack of sleep, the thousand small pressures of single motherhood and a demanding new career. But over the past few weeks, they had intensified. Sharp, stabbing pains that sometimes left her vision blurred and her hands trembling. Today's attack hit without warning as she stood in the Foundation's break room, filling her coffee mug. One moment she was mentally reviewing her upcoming meeting with the VA liaison. The next, pain exploded behind her right eye with such ferocity that the mug slipped from her grasp, shattering against the tile floor. Jessica gripped the counter, desperately trying to remain upright as the room tilted sickeningly around her. Through the fog of pain, she heard someone call her name, felt hands supporting her arms, guiding her to a chair. "Jessica, can you hear me?" Linda Blackwell's voice penetrated the haze. "Someone get Matthew." "And call an ambulance." "No ambulance. Jessica managed, the words scraping her throat. "I'm fine. Just need a minute." But her body betrayed her. The pain intensified, radiating outward until even keeping her eyes open became unbearable. She was vaguely aware of more voices, of someone pressing a cold cloth to her forehead, of Matthew's distinctive voice cutting through the commotion with calm authority. "Give her space. Linda, stay with her. Everyone else, back to work. Sarah, call Dr. Patel at Veterans Memorial. Tell him we're bringing Jessica in now." Jessica wanted to protest. She had meetings scheduled, cases that needed attention, Emma to think about, but the pain had stolen her words. She felt herself being lifted, Matthew's strong arms carrying her as if she weighed nothing. "My phone," she whispered against his shoulder. "Emma." "Sarah's contacting Mrs. Chen," Matthew assured her, his voice steady despite the rapid pace of his heartbeat against her ear. "Emma will be taken care of. Right now, we need to take care of you." The elevator descent, the walk through the lobby, the careful placement into Matthew's SUV, all blurred together in Jessica's pain-addled mind. She was aware of Matthew driving, of his occasional reassuring words, of his hand reaching across to squeeze hers briefly at a stoplight. "Almost there," he said, his voice a lifeline in the storm of her pain. "Just hold on, Jessica." At Veterans Memorial Hospital, events moved with surprising speed. Matthew's name opened doors, bypassed waiting rooms. Within minutes, Jessica found herself in an examination room, a doctor shining lights in her eyes, asking questions about her medical history, her symptoms, her deployments. "Any exposure to burn pits during your service?" Dr. Patel asked, making notes on his tablet. "Yes," Jessica admitted. "Both tours." Our field hospital was less than a mile from a major pit. Matthew, who had refused to leave her side despite the nurse's pointed suggestion that he wait outside, frowned. "Were you ever screened for toxic exposure after discharge?" Jessica shook her head, immediately regretting the movement as pain lanced through her skull. "Not specifically. Standard exit physical only." Dr. Patel's expression remained neutral, but Jessica recognized the concern in his eyes, the same look she'd given countless patients when suspecting something serious. "I'd like to run some tests, Jessica. CT scan first, then possibly an MRI." "Is that necessary?" she asked, already calculating the potential cost against her insurance deductible. "Foundation insurance covers everything," Matthew interjected, reading her concern. "No out-of-pocket expenses." Dr. Patel nodded approvingly. "We'll start with the scans and go from there. A nurse will be in shortly to take you down to radiology." When they were alone, Jessica closed her eyes, embarrassment washing over her. "I'm sorry about this. I've been having headaches for a while, but nothing like today." "Why didn't you say something?" Matthew asked. No accusation in his tone, only genuine concern. Jessica gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "Single mom, new job, history of pushing through pain. Pick your reason." She hesitated, then added softly, "After Jack died, I got used to handling everything alone. Asking for help doesn't come naturally anymore." Matthew was quiet for a moment. "I understand that better than most," he finally said. "After my injury, I was determined to manage everything myself. Nearly killed me before I admitted I needed assistance." The vulnerability in his admission touched Jessica deeply. Before she could respond, a nurse arrived to take her to radiology, and Matthew stepped out to make calls, promising to return soon. The next few hours passed in a blur of tests, questions, and growing anxiety. The CT scan led to an MRI, which led to more detailed imaging. Each test increased Jessica's sense of foreboding. Routine headaches didn't warrant this level of investigation. By late afternoon, she was back in a private room, an IV in her arm delivering fluids and pain medication that had finally dulled the agony to a manageable throb. Matthew had stepped out to call and check on Emma, who was staying with Mrs. Chen until Jessica's situation became clearer. When Dr. Patel returned, his serious expression confirmed Jessica's worst fears before he spoke a word. "Jessica," he began, taking the chair beside her bed. "I've reviewed your scans, and I've consulted with our neurology team. We've found a mass in your frontal lobe, approximately 3 centimeters in diameter." The clinical terminology couldn't soften the blow. A mass, a tumor. Jessica's medical training supplied all the implications her doctor tactfully avoided stating outright. "Is it—" She couldn't finish the question. "We won't know definitively until we perform a biopsy, but given its location and appearance, along with your history of toxic exposure in Afghanistan, there's significant concern." Jessica nodded mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to treatment options, survival rates, how to tell Emma whether her life insurance policy was still active. "What's the next step?" she asked, her nurse's training allowing her to focus on procedure when emotion threatened to overwhelm her. "I'd like to schedule the biopsy as soon as possible. Tomorrow, if we can arrange it. Based on those results, we'll develop a treatment plan. If it is what we suspect, we'd be looking at surgery, followed by chemotherapy and radiation." Jessica absorbed this information with outward calm, though her hands clutched the thin hospital blanket so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Timeline?" Dr. Patel hesitated. "If we confirm malignancy, I would recommend surgery within 2 weeks. The tumor's location is concerning. We're seeing some pressure on surrounding tissue that explains your symptoms. Without intervention, those symptoms will worsen." The door opened, and Matthew returned, immediately sensing the changed atmosphere. He looked from Jessica's pale face to Dr. Patel's somber expression. "What's happened?" Dr. Patel glanced at Jessica, silently asking permission to share her diagnosis. She nodded numbly. As the doctor explained his findings, Jessica watched Matthew's reaction, the tightening of his jaw, the slight straightening of his already perfect posture, the flash of something that might have been fear quickly replaced by resolute determination. "What are the best treatment options?" Matthew asked when Dr. Patel finished. "Who's the top neurosurgeon for this type of case?" "Dr. Catherine Lynn at Johns Hopkins would be my first choice," Dr. Patel replied, "but her waiting list is several months long." "Make the calls," Matthew said with quiet authority. "Whatever strings need pulling, whatever it costs. The foundation will cover everything." Jessica found her voice. "Matthew, you can't—" "I can," he interrupted firmly. "And I will. The foundation exists precisely for this purpose, to ensure veterans receive the care they deserve, especially when that care is for conditions related to their service. Dr. Patel excused himself to make arrangements, leaving Jessica alone with Matthew. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears. "Emma," Jessica finally whispered, the name encompassing all her concerns, all her terror. Matthew moved to sit on the edge of her bed, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, solid, anchoring her when everything else seemed to be spiraling away. "We'll figure it out," he promised. "Whatever happens, Emma will be taken care of. You're not alone in this, Jessica." The simple declaration broke something inside her. After 2 years of being strong, of holding everything together by sheer force of will, Jessica Morgan finally allowed herself to cry. Matthew held her hand firmly as silent tears tracked down her cheeks, offering the one thing she needed most, the freedom to be afraid. Later that evening, after Jessica had been admitted for overnight observation ahead of the next day's biopsy, Matthew left briefly to bring Emma to the hospital. Jessica had insisted on telling her daughter herself, unwilling to let Emma hear the news from anyone else. Watching her daughter enter the hospital room, small backpack clutched to her chest, eyes wide with apprehension, Jessica felt a fresh wave of grief. Not for herself, but for Emma. For all the uncertainty she was about to introduce into her child's already complicated life. "Mom?" Emma approached the bed cautiously. "Are you okay?" Jessica patted the space beside her. "Come sit with me, sweetheart. I need to talk to you about something important." As Emma climbed onto the bed, Jessica caught Matthew's eye over her daughter's head. He nodded encouragingly from the doorway, then stepped outside to give them privacy. "The doctors found out why I've been having headaches," Jessica began, choosing her words carefully. "I have something called a tumor in my brain. It's like a small lump that doesn't belong there, and it's making me feel sick." Emma's face scrunched in concentration. "Like when I had that bump on my knee from falling off the swing?" "Similar, but this is inside, where we can't see it. The doctors are going to do a special test tomorrow to learn more about it, and then they'll need to do surgery to take it out." "Will it hurt?" Emma asked, her small fingers tracing the IV line in Jessica's arm. "They'll give me medicine so I won't feel anything during the surgery," Jessica assured her. "And afterward I might feel sore for a while, but I'll get better." It was a hopeful version of the truth, the best she could offer without making promises she might not be able to keep. Emma was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information with the solemn thoughtfulness that sometimes made her seem far older than 6. "Is it because Daddy died?" she finally asked. "Did it make you too sad inside?" The question caught Jessica off guard. "No, sweetheart. This isn't because of sadness. It's just something that happened, maybe because of where I worked when I was a nurse in the Army." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Will you need to stay in the hospital like Miss Eleanor?" "For a little while, yes. And that's why I need to talk to you about what will happen while I'm getting better." Jessica took a deep breath. "You might need to stay with Mrs. Chen for a few days, or maybe with another friend." "What about Mr. Reynolds?" Emma asked, surprising Jessica with the suggestion. "He takes care of people. He could take care of us." Before Jessica could formulate a response, a light knock at the door announced Matthew's return. He entered carrying a small paper bag. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, handing the bag to Emma. Inside was a sandwich from the hospital cafeteria and a chocolate pudding cup, a small kindness that brought fresh tears to Jessica's eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, encompassing more than just the food in her gratitude. Matthew nodded, understanding. "I've spoken with Mrs. Chen. She's prepared to have Emma stay with her as long as needed." He hesitated, then added, "But I've also made up the guest room in my apartment, if that would be preferable. It's closer to the hospital." The offer hung in the air between them, weighted with significance beyond the practical consideration he'd mentioned. Jessica felt Emma's expectant gaze and realized her daughter was waiting for her answer as eagerly as Matthew seemed to be. "Let's see what tomorrow brings," Jessica said finally. "The biopsy results will tell us more about what we're facing." Later, after Emma had fallen asleep in the recliner beside Jessica's bed, Matthew stood at the window, staring out at the darkened city. Jessica watched him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand occasionally rubbed his thigh where flesh met prosthetic, a habit she'd observed when he was deep in thought or managing pain. "You should go home," she said quietly. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Matthew turned, his expression inscrutable in the dim light. "I'll stay until they take you for the procedure. Sarah has cleared my schedule." Jessica wanted to protest but found she didn't have the energy. More than that, she didn't want to be alone with her fears. "Thank you." Matthew moved to sit in the chair on the opposite side of her bed from where Emma slept. "Do you remember much about Camp Dwyer?" he asked unexpectedly. The question seemed odd, given the circumstances, but Jessica welcomed the distraction. Parts of it, the heat, the dust that got into everything, the constant sound of helicopters. "I have fragments," Matthew said, his voice low. "After the IED, everything's hazy. But I remember a nurse who stayed with me during the worst of it, when the pain was unbearable, when I thought I couldn't hold on anymore." Jessica studied his face, trying to recall the hundreds of wounded soldiers she'd treated. "I worked so many trauma cases during those months. It's possible I was one of your nurses, but I can't specifically remember." "She sang," Matthew continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "Not well, by her own admission. Old Johnny Cash songs, because that's what I told her I listened to as a kid, for hours, while they stabilized me enough for transport." A memory stirred in Jessica's mind. A young captain, badly wounded, one leg unsalvageable, fighting for his life after an IED explosion. She'd stayed beyond her shift, holding his hand through waves of agony that the morphine couldn't touch, singing in a whisper when words weren't enough. "Folsom Prison Blues," she said softly. "You said it was your father's favorite." Matthew's eyes met hers, recognition flickering between them. "It was you." Jessica nodded slowly, the connection that had been hovering at the edges of her awareness finally crystallizing into certainty. "I didn't put it together until now. There were so many casualties that winter." "You told me I had to keep fighting," Matthew said, his voice rough with emotion. "That there was purpose waiting for me beyond the pain." "I tell all my patients that," Jessica admitted. "But with me, you meant it." Matthew leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You're the reason I started the foundation. After I recovered, I tried to find you, to thank you, but you'd already left the service." The revelation settled over Jessica like a warm blanket, bringing with it a strange sense of completion, of circles closing. "And now here we are." "Here we are," Matthew echoed, reaching across to take her hand, his touch as careful as if she might break. "Which is why I need you to fight again, Jessica, not just for yourself or for Emma, but for all the veterans who need your advocacy, for the work we've only just begun." Jessica felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "I'm trying." "I know." Matthew's grip tightened slightly. "And I'll be here every step. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the biopsy shows, you're not facing it alone." In the quiet of the hospital room, with her daughter sleeping peacefully beside her and Matthew's hand warm around hers, Jessica allowed herself to believe him. The journey ahead would be difficult, perhaps the most difficult she'd ever faced. But for the first time since Jack's death, she wasn't walking it alone. The knowledge brought its own kind of peace, enough to let her close her eyes and surrender to much-needed sleep. Outside her room, unnoticed by either of them, Sarah Pierce stood in the hallway, her expression troubled as she watched through the narrow window in the door. In her hand, she clutched a manila envelope, its contents threatening to unravel everything: the foundation, Matthew's reputation, and the fragile new bond forming between him and the woman whose life now hung in the balance. After a long moment of indecision, Sarah slipped the envelope into her bag and walked away, her footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. The biopsy results arrived with clinical efficiency 3 days later. Dr. Lynn, the renowned neurosurgeon Matthew had somehow convinced to take Jessica's case, delivered the news personally in Jessica's hospital room, her calm demeanor neither softening nor exaggerating the gravity of the diagnosis. "The tumor is malignant, as we suspected," she explained, displaying the scan images on her tablet. "Grade 3 astrocytoma, likely resulting from toxic exposure during your service. The good news is that we caught it before it progressed to grade IV. The concerning news is its location. It's growing near areas that control motor function and speech." Jessica absorbed this information with the detachment she'd cultivated as a nurse, focusing on the medical facts rather than their implications for her life, for Emma's future. "What's the treatment plan?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning beneath her professional facade. "Surgery first, scheduled for Monday morning, doctor." And Lynn replied, "I believe we can remove approximately 80% of the tumor based on its position. Following recovery, you'll need radiation and chemotherapy to address the remaining cancer cells." Matthew, who had barely left Jessica's side since her collapse, asked the question she couldn't bring herself to voice. "Prognosis?" Dr. Lynn met his gaze directly, her expression compassionate but honest. "With aggressive treatment, 5-year survival rates for this type of tumor range from 30 to 60%. Jessica's age and overall health are significant advantages." It wasn't the death sentence Jessica had feared in her darkest moments, but neither was it the reassurance she'd hoped for, a 40 to 70% chance that Emma would grow up without her, that the life they were finally rebuilding would crumble again. "I'll give you some time to process this," Dr. Lynn said, sensing Jessica's need for space. "The nurse will bring in consent forms and pre-surgical information. We'll talk again tomorrow to address any questions." After the doctor left, silence filled the room. Jessica stared at her hands, noticing with detached curiosity that they weren't trembling. Shouldn't they be trembling? Shouldn't she be falling apart? "Jessica." Matthew's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood beside her bed, his expression reflecting determination rather than pity. "Dr. Lynn is the best, the absolute best. If anyone can beat these odds, it's you." Jessica nodded mechanically. "I need to call Eleanor and make arrangements for Emma during my recovery, and update my will just in case." "Stop," Matthew interrupted gently. "One step at a time. Surgery first, then recovery. The foundation is handling everything else, medical leave, insurance, all of it. Eleanor already knows. I called her yesterday. And Emma—" He hesitated. "Emma is staying with me for now, Mrs. Chen drops her at the office after school and Sarah helps with homework until I take her home." This information penetrated Jessica's fog of shock. "Emma is staying with you? Since when?" "Since the night after your collapse," Matthew admitted. "She was worried about being far from the hospital and my apartment is only 10 minutes away. I hope that's okay. I should have asked, but things happened quickly and—" "It's fine," Jessica assured him, touched by his concern and by the image of her reserved daughter finding comfort in Matthew's steady presence. "More than fine. Thank you." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah Pierce entered, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression Jessica couldn't quite read, something between determination and apprehension. "Matthew, Jessica," she acknowledged them both with a nod. "I'm sorry to intrude, but this can't wait any longer." Matthew's posture stiffened. "Sarah, this isn't the time for foundation business." "It's not foundation business," Sarah replied, her voice tight, "at least not entirely." She approached Jessica's bed, her usual cool efficiency replaced by unusual hesitation. "I've been investigating something for months. I didn't know how it connected to you, Jessica, not until recently, but now I believe you need to see this, both of you, before any more time passes." She opened the folder and withdrew several documents, laying them on Jessica's bed tray. "These are internal VA memos regarding toxic exposure cases from Afghanistan, specifically burn pit exposure at forward operating bases, including Camp Dwyer." Jessica glanced at the documents, recognizing the official letterhead and bureaucratic language. "How did you get these?" "My brother was stationed at Dwyer in 2019. He died last year, brain cancer, remarkably similar to your diagnosis." The VA denied his claim, stating insufficient evidence connecting his illness to his service. Sarah's professional mask slipped, revealing raw grief beneath. "He was 31 years old." Matthew picked up one of the documents, scanning its contents with growing intensity. This memo explicitly acknowledges the cancer clusters among personnel stationed near burn pits, but recommends against public disclosure due to potential financial liability implications. "Keep reading," Sarah urged, her voice harder now. "Page 4. Matthew flipped to the indicated page, his expression darkening as he read. They knew. Since at least 2017, they had epidemiological data showing the connection, but they buried it. Jessica felt sick, her medical outrage overtaking personal fear. How many veterans have been denied treatment because of this cover-up? Hundreds at least, Sarah replied. Maybe thousands, including my brother, including you. Matthew looked at Sarah with new understanding. This is why you joined the foundation, not because you believed in our work, but because you were looking for evidence. Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. Initially, yes. I needed access to case files, to patterns of denial. I thought the foundation might be complicit. Many veteran organizations have financial ties to the VA that compromise their advocacy. She paused. I was wrong about that. About you. Jessica tried to process this revelation through her fog of medication and shock. Why show us this now? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Because your case file came across my desk during your medical leave paperwork. The similarities to my brother's case were unmistakable. And because, she hesitated, because I found something else, something about your husband, Jessica. Jessica felt her heart stutter. Jack? What about Jack? Sarah pulled another document from the folder, this one marked with classified stamps that had been crossed out. Captain Jack Morgan was part of a special reconnaissance unit tasked with environmental assessment at forward operating bases. According to this report, his team documented toxic exposure levels at multiple sites, including Dwyer, and submitted findings through the chain of command. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Jessica's mind raced, connecting dots she'd never seen before. Jack's last mission, the one they wouldn't tell me about, he was following up on these findings? Sarah nodded grimly. Based on the timing and location, it appears so. His team was supposedly killed by an IED, but the after-action report contains inconsistencies. No forensic documentation, minimal witness statements, rushed notification procedures. Matthew's expression had grown increasingly grave. You're suggesting his death wasn't an accident. I'm suggesting, Sarah said carefully, that Captain Morgan discovered something powerful people wanted to keep hidden, and then he died under circumstances that weren't fully investigated. Jessica felt the room tilt around her, the revelation too enormous to absorb. Jack's death, the central tragedy that had reshaped her entire life, might not have been the random wartime casualty she'd accepted. It might have been something darker, more deliberate. There's more, Sarah continued, her voice gentler now. The officer who signed off on the final report of Jack's incident was Colonel Robert Westfield. Matthew went completely still. My father's former commanding officer in Vietnam, current chairman of our board of directors. And, Sarah added, the senior VA official who personally denied my brother's claim, overriding the medical review board's recommendation for approval. The pieces aligned with devastating clarity. Jessica struggled to breathe as the implications cascaded through her mind, her husband's death, her own illness, the systematic denial of care to veterans like her, all potentially connected to a cover-up reaching to the highest levels of the VA and possibly into the foundation itself. I need to sit down, Matthew said, his voice tight with controlled rage. He lowered himself into the chair beside Jessica's bed, his prosthetic leg suddenly seeming to pain him more than usual. Why didn't you bring this to me sooner? He asked Sarah, no accusation in his tone, only a desire to understand. I needed to be certain, she replied. And I needed to know where you stood, whether you were part of the problem or someone who would help solve it. She looked from Matthew to Jessica. "I have my answer now." Jessica reached for the document about Jack with trembling fingers, needing to see for herself. The sterile language describing her husband's death, the husband who had kissed her goodbye on a Tuesday morning, promising to be home for Emma's birthday the following week, felt obscene in its bureaucratic detachment. "What do we do with this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew and Sarah exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. "First," Matthew said, taking Jessica's hand, "you focus on your surgery and recovery. Nothing is more important than that. And while you heal," Sarah continued, "we gather more evidence. I have contacts, other family members of affected veterans, a journalist who's been investigating similar cases, a sympathetic congressman on the Veterans Affairs Committee." "Westfield and the board," Jessica said, thinking through the implications. "If they're involved in this cover-up, then the foundation itself could be compromised," Matthew acknowledged, his expression hardening. "Though I find it difficult to believe the entire board is complicit. Some, perhaps, but not all." Sarah nodded in agreement. "We need to move carefully. These are powerful people with significant resources and influence." Jessica closed her eyes, feeling the weight of this new knowledge pressing against her already burdened shoulders. Jack had died pursuing the truth about toxic exposure, the very exposure now threatening her own life, threatening to take her from Emma just as Jack had been taken from them. The bitter irony was almost too much to bear. "Jessica?" Matthew's voice pulled her back. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes, finding both Matthew and Sarah watching her with concern. "No," she answered honestly. "I'm not all right. But I will be." A new resolve strengthened her voice. "Jack died for this truth." "I won't let that be for nothing." Matthew squeezed her hand, his grip conveying what words couldn't: solidarity, determination, the promise of support through whatever came next. Sarah gathered the documents, returning them to her folder. "I should go. Emma will be done with school soon, and I promised to take her for ice cream before bringing her to the hospital." "Sarah!" Jessica called as the younger woman turned to leave. "Thank you for trusting us with this, for caring about what happened to your brother, to Jack, to all of them." Sarah paused at the door, her usual composure briefly giving way to genuine emotion. "When Emma came into the office that day with your résumé, I thought it was the most unprofessional thing I'd ever witnessed." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Now I think it might have been fate." After she left, silence settled over the hospital room. Jessica leaned back against her pillows, mentally and emotionally exhausted. "All this time," she said finally, "I thought Jack died in just another senseless wartime accident. I told Emma her father was a hero who died serving his country. I never imagined—" "He was a hero," Matthew said firmly. "Perhaps even more so than you knew. He was trying to protect his fellow soldiers, to hold accountable those responsible for their suffering." Jessica nodded, finding solace in this reframing of Jack's death. Not a random tragedy, but a sacrifice in pursuit of justice, a purpose that aligned with everything she'd known and loved about her husband. "Matthew," she said, needing to voice the question that had been forming since Sarah's revelations, "how well do you know Colonel Westfield?" Matthew's expression darkened. "He was my father's friend. After my parents died, he helped arrange my education, supported my military career. He was the first donor to the foundation." He shook his head, disbelief evident in his features. "I've trusted him completely." The betrayal was written clearly in Matthew's face. Another father figure lost. Another foundation of his life revealed to be built on lies. "We don't have all the facts yet," Jessica reminded him gently. "There could be explanations we haven't considered." "Perhaps," Matthew conceded, though his tone suggested he'd already reached his own conclusions. "But whatever the truth is, we'll face it together." He met her gaze directly. "After your surgery, after you're well, that comes first." Jessica nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by fatigue. The emotional toll of the day's revelations, compounded by her illness and the looming surgery, left her barely able to keep her eyes open. "Rest," Matthew urged, adjusting her pillows. "I'll be here when you wake up." As Jessica drifted toward sleep, her mind continued to process Sarah's revelations, fitting them into the puzzle of her life. Jack's death, her own illness, Matthew's foundation, Sarah's brother, separate threads now revealed to be part of a single, complex tapestry. And at the center of it all, Emma. Emma, who had walked into the Reynolds Veterans Foundation with nothing but her mother's resume and unwavering determination. Emma, whose simple act of courage had set in motion events that might finally bring truth to light. In her last moments of consciousness before sleep claimed her, Jessica felt a strange sense of peace beneath the turmoil. Whatever came next, the surgery, the recovery, the fight for justice, she wasn't facing it alone. For the first time in years, she had allies. She had purpose beyond mere survival. Most importantly, she had hope. In the corridor outside Jessica's room, Eleanor Wilson sat in her wheelchair, having heard every word of Sarah's revelations through the partially open door. Her gnarled hands gripped the armrests, her expression a complex mixture of grief, anger, and grim determination. "So that's how it is," she murmured to herself. "All these years later, and the same devils are still at work." She reached into her sweater pocket and withdrew a faded photograph. A group of young military medical personnel in Vietnam, arms around each other's shoulders, faces young and unlined by the decades of struggle to come. Eleanor's finger traced one face in particular, a handsome young doctor standing beside her younger self. "You were right all along, Thomas," she whispered to her long-dead husband. "The war never really ended. It just came home with us." With newfound purpose, Eleanor turned her wheelchair toward the elevator. She had phone calls to make, old connections to re-establish, her own evidence to add to Sarah's growing collection. Cancer might be claiming her body, but Eleanor Wilson's mind remained sharp as ever. And before death took her, she had one final mission to complete. For Thomas, for Jack Morgan, for Sarah's brother, for Jessica, and for all the others who had been silenced. The truth would come to light, whatever the cost. Snow fell gently outside the windows of the Reynolds Foundation offices, transforming the city into a glittering wonderland as dusk settled on Christmas Eve. The annual holiday gathering was in full swing, the usual professional atmosphere replaced by festive decorations, soft music, and the warm murmur of conversation. In one corner, Emma Morgan stood beside a towering Christmas tree, carefully hanging a handmade ornament. A small clay star painted gold with "Family" written in her careful 6-year-old script. Matthew Reynolds knelt beside her, steadying the ladder as she reached for a high branch. "Perfect," he assured her, his normally serious face softened with affection. "It's the best one on the tree." Emma beamed, climbing down to admire her handiwork. "Do you think Mom will like it?" "Miss Eleanor helped me make it at the center." "She'll love it," Matthew promised, glancing across the room to where Jessica stood talking with several board members, her smile bright despite the faint shadows of fatigue beneath her eyes. 4 months had passed since Jessica's surgery. Dr. Lin had managed to remove nearly 90% of the tumor, exceeding her initial estimates, and Jessica had endured 6 weeks of radiation therapy with remarkable resilience. Her prognosis had improved significantly, though the specter of recurrence would remain a constant companion for years to come. But tonight wasn't about illness or uncertainty. Tonight was a celebration of survival, of truth finally coming to light, of justice long delayed but not ultimately denied. At the center of the room, Eleanor Wilson held court from her wheelchair, surrounded by a circle of admiring listeners. Though visibly frailer than she had been months earlier, her spirit remained indomitable, her voice carrying with surprising strength as she regaled her audience with stories from her Vietnam service. "And that's when I told the general," she was saying, "that if he wanted to reprimand me for improvising medical supplies, he was welcome to try performing surgery with twigs and shoelaces himself." Laughter rippled through her listeners. Even Linda Blackwell, typically reserved, wiped tears of mirth from her eyes. Eleanor had become something of a mascot for the foundation in recent months, a living link to an earlier generation of veterans, a reminder of the continuity of service and sacrifice. What few knew was the pivotal role she had played in bringing to light the toxic exposure cover-up. Eleanor's meticulous records, preserved over decades, had provided crucial evidence linking current VA officials to similar denials of Agent Orange effects in Vietnam. Her testimony before the Congressional Committee had been devastating in its precision and moral clarity. "I've been watching young men and women die of these exposures for 50 years, she had told the packed hearing room, her voice unwavering despite her frailty. "Different wars, different toxins, same denial of responsibility. I will not go to my grave without seeing this cycle broken." Across the room, Sarah Pierce approached Jessica, offering a glass of sparkling cider. "Congratulations again on the official launch of the Women Veterans Health Initiative," she said, nodding toward the new banner displayed prominently on the wall. "The funding approval came through faster than anyone expected." Jessica accepted the glass with a smile. Having a spotlight shone on the VA's discriminatory practices certainly accelerated the timeline. Though I suspect Matthew's connections didn't hurt either. The two women had developed an unlikely friendship in the months since Sarah's revelations, their initial wariness transformed by shared purpose and mutual respect. Sarah now served as the Foundation's Accountability Director, a new position created specifically to ensure transparency and ethical oversight of all operations. "Speaking of Matthew," Sarah said, her tone carefully neutral, "he's been watching you all evening when he thinks no one's looking." Jessica felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with her healing body's occasional temperature regulation issues. "Has he?" "You know he has," Sarah replied with uncharacteristic directness. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Jessica could formulate a response, the gentle tapping of silverware against glass drew everyone's attention to the center of the room, where Matthew now stood beside Eleanor's wheelchair. The conversations quieted as all eyes turned toward them. "Thank you all for joining us this evening," Matthew began, his voice carrying easily through the space. "This has been a year of profound challenges and equally profound revelations for the Reynolds Foundation." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gathering. The exposure of the toxic burn pit cover-up had dominated headlines for weeks, resulting in congressional hearings, leadership changes at the VA, and a complete restructuring of the Foundation's board. Colonel Westfield and two other board members now faced federal charges for their roles in suppressing evidence and diverting funds meant for veterans' care. "We've weathered a storm," Matthew continued, "one that revealed rot in our Foundation's very structure. But in tearing down what was compromised, we've been given the opportunity to rebuild something stronger, more transparent, and ultimately more faithful to our mission of serving all veterans." He gestured to Eleanor beside him. "We've been reminded that our responsibility extends across generations, from those who served in Vietnam, like Dr. Wilson, to those returning from Afghanistan and beyond. The battles change, but the covenant we make with those who serve remains the same." Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Tonight, however," Matthew said, his tone shifting to something more personal, "I want to speak about something different, something I've learned over this challenging year that has nothing to do with policy or politics and everything to do with what makes life worth fighting for." His gaze found Jessica in the crowd. and something in his expression made her breath catch. "A year ago," he continued, "a brave little girl walked into this building carrying her mother's résumé. She was determined, against all odds, to secure a chance for her family's future." Matthew smiled at Emma, who stood beside Jessica now, watching him with rapt attention. What none of us realized at the time was that she wasn't just delivering a job application. She was delivering hope to her mother, to this organization, and, his voice softened, to me. The room had gone completely still, every person present sensing the significance of this rare personal revelation from their typically reserved leader. Before Emma and Jessica Morgan entered our lives, this foundation was my purpose, the reason I pushed through rehabilitation, the legacy I hoped to build from the wreckage of injury. What I didn't recognize was how empty that purpose was without connection, without family, without love. Jessica felt tears welling in her eyes, her hand tightening around Emma's shoulder. "Over these months," Matthew continued, "as we've faced medical crises, institutional betrayals, and the painful work of rebuilding, I've been given the most precious gift imaginable. The chance to be part of something greater than achievement or legacy. The chance to be part of a family." He moved toward Jessica and Emma now, his stride even despite his prosthetic, his eyes never leaving theirs. "Jessica," he said, his voice pitched for her though everyone could hear. "You came here seeking a job, but you gave us a model of courage and integrity that transformed this organization. Your determination to seek justice, not just for yourself, but for all veterans like you, even while fighting your own health battle, has been—" He paused, seeming to search for adequate words. "The most extraordinary demonstration of strength I've ever witnessed." Jessica blinked rapidly, fighting to maintain her composure, as Matthew turned his attention to Emma. "And you, Miss Emma Morgan," he said, his smile gentle, "have taught me more about bravery than 2 decades in the Marines ever did. You walked into a world that wasn't meant for you and changed it forever, with nothing but love and determination." Emma beamed up at him, uncharacteristically comfortable in the spotlight when it came from Matthew. "A few weeks ago," Matthew continued, addressing the room again, "Emma asked me a question that I've been thinking about ever since." He knelt down to Emma's level, his voice softening. "She asked if she could call me Dad." A collective intake of breath rippled through the gathering. Jessica felt her heart thundering in her chest as Matthew looked up at her, vulnerability and hope naked in his expression. "I told her that would be the greatest honor of my life," he said, "but that there was a proper way to do things." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "And that proper way begins with asking her mother a very important question." The room disappeared for Jessica, the guests, the foundation, the world outside. Everything narrowing to Matthew kneeling before her, Emma's excited grip on her hand, and the small box that represented a future she had stopped believing possible after Jack's death. "Jessica Morgan," Matthew said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You walked into my life carrying more strength, integrity, and love than I knew could exist in one person. Through illness and health, through uncovering painful truths and building new beginnings, you've shown me what real courage looks like." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, of allowing me to be Emma's father, of building a family together?" Time seemed suspended as Jessica looked from the ring to Matthew's face, seeing in his eyes everything she had come to love about him. His unwavering integrity, his quiet strength, his capacity for tenderness that few were privileged to witness. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as joy broke through her composure. "Yes, absolutely yes." The room erupted in applause as Matthew stood and gathered both Jessica and Emma into an embrace. Emma's delighted laughter rang out above the celebration, her small arms wrapped tightly around both adults. "Does this mean I can call you Dad now?" she asked Matthew, loud enough for those nearby to hear and smile. "It sure does, sweetheart," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "It would make me the happiest man in the world." From her position near the Christmas tree, Eleanor Wilson observed the scene with tears streaming unashamedly down her lined face. Beside her wheelchair stood Sarah, who reached down to squeeze the older woman's shoulder gently. "Well, how about that?" Eleanor said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Sometimes the world does get things right, even if it takes its sweet time about it." Sarah nodded, her own eyes suspiciously bright. "They deserve this happiness, all three of them." "Indeed they do," Eleanor agreed. "And so do you, my dear. Don't think I haven't noticed that handsome VA investigator who keeps finding reasons to consult with you on the case." Sarah's cheeks colored slightly. "That's strictly professional, Eleanor." "Of course it is," Eleanor replied with a knowing smile. "Just like it was strictly professional when Thomas Wilson kept finding reasons to consult with the new nurse in his MASH unit back in '69. As the celebration continued around them, Jessica found herself standing by the window with Matthew, watching the snow fall over the city. Emma had joined a group of children, the sons and daughters of other Foundation employees, playing a game beneath the Christmas tree under Linda Blackwell's watchful eye. "Are you happy?" Matthew asked softly, his arm around Jessica's waist, her head resting against his shoulder. "More than I thought possible again," she answered honestly. "When Jack died, I thought that part of my life was over, that Emma and I would just survive." Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "After my injury, I thought purpose was enough, that if I built something meaningful, it would fill the empty spaces." "And now?" Jessica prompted, turning to face him fully. "Now I understand what Eleanor told me months ago when she first came to the Foundation with her evidence." Matthew smiled at the memory. "Captain Reynolds," she said, "buildings and organizations don't keep you warm at night. They don't laugh at your jokes or hold your hand when the phantoms come. Only people do that. Only family." Jessica glanced across the room to where Eleanor sat, seemingly holding court despite her frailty. "She's getting weaker," she observed quietly. "The hospice nurse says it could be weeks now, not months." Matthew's arm tightened around her. "She's determined to see us married first. Said she's not going anywhere until she sees you in a wedding dress." Jessica smiled through the ache in her heart. "Then we'd better not keep her waiting too long." "January 15th, Matthew confirmed. "Small ceremony, just as you wanted." Eleanor in the place of honor. A comfortable silence fell between them as they watched the gathering. The Foundation staff, who had become extended family. The veterans whose lives had been changed by their work. Emma laughing with newfound confidence among friends. "When Emma came to my office that day," Matthew said reflectively, "I thought she was an anomaly, a disruption to the order I'd carefully maintained. I had no idea she was actually the beginning of everything that mattered." Jessica leaned up to kiss him softly. "She has that effect on people." Across the room, Emma looked up and caught sight of them, her face lighting with joy. She excused herself from the game and ran to join them, slipping naturally between them as Matthew and Jessica each put an arm around her. "Look," Emma pointed through the window at the thickly falling snow. "It's like the world is getting a fresh start." Jessica and Matthew exchanged a glance over her head, both struck by the simple wisdom in her observation. "You know what, sweetheart?" Jessica said, drawing her daughter closer. "I think you're absolutely right." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in pristine white, while inside, surrounded by the family they had found against all odds, Jessica Morgan finally understood what Eleanor had told her during those dark days after her diagnosis. "Families aren't just born, dear. The best ones are built. chosen day by day, challenge by challenge, love by deliberate love. As Emma's laughter mingled with the holiday music and Matthew's hand found hers, Jessica silently thanked her brave little girl who had walked into an office building one desperate morning carrying nothing but hope and a creased résumé. Some journeys began with a single step. Theirs had begun with a child's courage and would continue day by day, built on truth, strengthened by adversity, and sustained by the kind of love that created families from the most unexpected beginnings. And in the gentle glow of Christmas lights, with snow falling like blessings outside the window, that seemed like the greatest gift of all. In a world that often forgets our sacrifices, this story reminds us it's never too late for second chances. Jessica and Matthew found each other after unimaginable loss, her husband's death, his physical wounds from service, proving that life's most beautiful chapters can begin in our later years. Like Eleanor wisely observed, families aren't just born. The best ones are built, chosen day by day, challenge by challenge, love by deliberate love. Many of us understand what it means to rebuild after losing a spouse, facing health challenges, or feeling our contributions forgotten. Yet this Christmas tale shows how courage, like little Emma's determination to help her mother, can transform loneliness into belonging. The snow falling outside their window symbolizes what we all seek, a fresh start, regardless of age or circumstance. As you reflect on this story, I wonder, what unexpected person has brought light back into your life after a dark period? Or, if you've served our country, how has that experience shaped your understanding of family and connection? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.